It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Emily and I had been married for 12 years. Our life together wasn't perfect, but it was ours. She was ambitious, driven, and dazzlingly intelligent, a force to be reckoned with at her marketing firm. I always admired her fire, even if it meant long hours and late-night strategy calls. Meanwhile, I worked from home, managing software projects and keeping our household steady. The first cracks in the foundation appeared after she was assigned a major project with a new colleague, Eric. She spoke of him often, too often. Eric has the sharpest mind in the office, she'd say, or Eric's ideas are so innovative. At first, I was happy she found someone to challenge her professionally, but soon, the compliments felt excessive. My gut stirred with unease. Then came the suggestion that rocked our marriage. One night, after dinner, Emily poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from me at the kitchen table, her expression oddly serene. "Have you ever thought about opening our marriage?" she asked. The words hit me like a freight train. "What?" I blinked, hoping I'd misheard. She swirled her wine glass, avoiding my gaze. "I mean, we've been together for so long. Don't you think maybe we'd benefit from exploring other connections?" My mind raced. "You mean seeing other people? While still married?" She nodded, her voice soft, almost coaxing. "It's not about replacing what we have, Mark. It's about expanding it." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to whisper sweet nothings to me on lazy Sunday mornings. "Why now?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "It's just something I've been thinking about. A way to keep things exciting. And I thought you'd appreciate the honesty." Honesty. That word stung. My mind went to Eric. Was this about him? Did she already have someone lined up? For weeks, I wrestled with the idea. I couldn't shake the image of Emily laughing at dinner with another man, her hand brushing his as they shared a bottle of wine. She assured me it was just a conversation, that nothing had happened yet. But the word "yet" loomed like a storm cloud. And then, one night, I stumbled upon the truth. Returning early from a business trip, I found her phone on the counter, a series of notifications lighting up the screen. It was from Eric. The messages were unmistakable. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Can we meet again soon?" The blood drained from my face as realization hit me. This wasn't about exploration or honesty. She had already made her choice. I stood frozen in the kitchen, her phone clutched in my hand as if it had physically burned me. The messages blurred together, each word hammering home a truth I didn't want to face. Emily, my wife, my partner of over a decade, had already crossed the line. This wasn't some idle fantasy she wanted to explore. It was reality. The sound of her laughter broke my trance. She was in the living room, watching some sitcom like nothing had changed, like our world wasn't collapsing in on itself. My chest tightened as I moved toward the doorway, my legs leaden, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Emily," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. She turned to me, her smile faltering. "Yeah." I held up her phone. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes darted to the device, her expression shifting in an instant. Panic, guilt, then a mask of calm. She'd always been quick on her feet. "Mark, you went through my phone," she accused, as though I were the one who had crossed a line. "Don't," I snapped, the word cutting through the air like a whip. "Don't make this about me. What the hell is this?" I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, its screen still glowing with Eric's messages. She looked at the phone, then at me, her jaw tightening. "You had no right to snoop." "I had no right?" I took a step closer, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, and I'm the one in the wrong?" Emily stood, arms crossed, defiant now. "It's not what you think, Mark." "Then enlighten me," I challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been screwing her coworker." She flinched, but only for a moment. "It's not like that," she said, her voice softer now, as though that would erase the evidence staring us both in the face. "Eric and I, we've been close. Yes, but I haven't slept with him." "Yet," I spat, throwing her earlier word back at her. "Isn't that what you told me?" You wanted to keep things honest? My laughter was bitter. What a joke. Her face hardened. You don't understand, she shot back, her tone defensive. I've spent years feeling invisible, Mark. You're so wrapped up in your projects, your routines. You barely notice me anymore. That's your excuse? I barked. I didn't pay you enough attention, so you ran to the first guy who stroked your ego? It wasn't like that, she yelled, her voice cracking. Eric, he listens to me. He makes me feel alive. I stared at her, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. And I don't. My voice dropped to a whisper. 12 years, Emily. I've given you 12 years of my life. Was that not enough? Her silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought I might cry. But then, a cold clarity settled over me. The love we'd built, the life we'd shared. It wasn't enough for her. I saw it in her eyes, heard it in her words. Eric had become the center of her world, and I was just background noise. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my tone measured but ice cold. You're going to end this. Him, the messages, whatever it is you think you have with him. It's over. Her eyes widened. Mark. Or, I continued, cutting her off, I'm walking away. No open marriage, no second chances. If you want him so badly, you can have him. But you won't have me. The room fell silent, the weight of my ultimatum settling between us. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not for what she'd done, but for what she stood to lose. Mark, she said again, her voice breaking, I love you. I don't want to lose us. Then prove it, I said, my voice a low growl. Because right now, Emily, I don't know who you are. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the living room, her face a portrait of guilt and confusion. Upstairs, I locked myself in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, the anger coursing through me giving way to something deeper, something darker. Betrayal. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. My trust in Emily was shattered, and there was no putting the pieces back together. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I hadn't slept, my mind looping through every moment of our marriage, trying to pinpoint the cracks I must have missed. I heard Emily moving around downstairs, but I had no desire to face her, not yet. My anger hadn't cooled, but beneath it, a deeper hurt gnawed at me. Finally, I dragged myself out of bed. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table with a mug of coffee, her eyes red and puffy. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was swallowed by the bitterness still lodged in my chest. Morning, she said, her voice tentative. I ignored her, heading straight for the coffee pot. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Mark, she started again. We need to talk. I slammed my mug onto the counter, spinning to face her. Talk? I hissed. You want to talk now, after everything? Her lip trembled, but she held my gaze. I've ended it with Eric. I called him this morning and told him it's over. The words should have brought some relief, but they didn't. That's it. I snapped. You think saying it's over fixes this? I'm trying, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, Mark. A terrible mistake. But I'm here, and I want to fix things. I laughed bitterly. You want to fix things? Tell me, Emily, when did you decide our marriage wasn't enough? Was it before or after you kissed him? Or maybe it was during one of those late-night meetings you didn't think I'd notice. It wasn't like that, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I was lonely, Mark. You shut me out for years. You were always working, always distracted. And Eric, he made me feel seen. Seen? I scoffed, my voice dripping with contempt. I've been here, Emily, every day, every night, for 12 years. And you want to tell me you felt invisible? Her shoulders shook as she sobbed into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. The cold morning air hit me like a slap, but it did little to clear my head. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, the same route I'd taken 100 times before, but everything felt different now. The homes, the trees, the quiet streets, they all seemed like relics from another life. A life that had been ripped away from me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, I thought it might be Emily, but the screen showed a message from my friend Matt. Grabbing beers tonight. You in? I hesitated. Matt didn't know what was going on, and the thought of explaining it made my stomach churn. But the idea of sitting in that house, pretending everything was normal, was unbearable. I typed back a quick reply, yeah, I'll be there. That night, as I slid into a booth at the bar, Matt greeted me with a grin. Finally. Thought you'd gone off the grid, man. I forced a smile. Yeah, just been busy. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. You all right? Fine, I lied, taking a long sip of my beer. The truth was a weight I wasn't ready to share. Not yet. We talked about work, sports, anything but my crumbling marriage. But halfway through my second beer, Matt leaned in, his tone serious. Something's up, Mark. Spill. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's Emily, I admitted. She's been seeing someone else. Matt's eyes widened. What the hell? Are you serious? Yeah, I said bitterly. Her coworker, Eric. That bastard, Matt growled. What are you gonna do? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Part of me wants to walk away, but another part, I don't know if I'm ready to give up. Mark, Matt said, his voice firm, you deserve better than this. If she's stepping out on you now, who's to say she won't do it again? The words hit me hard because they echoed the doubts swirling in my mind. Could I ever trust her again? And if not, what was the point of staying? When I got home that night, the house was dark. Emily was already in bed, or at least pretending to be. I sat in the living room, staring at the faint glow of the clock on the wall. My mind replayed Matt's words over and over. You deserve better. For the first time, I let myself imagine a life without her. A life where I wasn't constantly questioning, doubting, hurting. And for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. It felt freeing. As I sat there in the quiet, a resolve began to form. Emily's betrayal had broken something between us, something that might never be fixed. And if that was the case, I owed it to myself to move on, to rebuild, even if it meant starting from scratch. Tomorrow, I decided, would bring answers, one way or another. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. For days, I'd been treading water, caught between anger, heartbreak, and uncertainty. But last night's conversation with Matt had stirred something in me, a sense of self-worth I'd let slip in the chaos of betrayal. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in limbo. I needed answers, and more than that, I needed a decision. When I walked into the kitchen, Emily was already there, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. She looked up as I entered, her face pale, her eyes hollow from a night of crying. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was drowned by the steel in my resolve. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. She nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. I sat across from her, the table a gulf between us. I've spent the last few days trying to figure out if this marriage can survive. If we can survive. Her breath hitched, but she said nothing. I need the truth, Emily. All of it. No more lies, no more half-truths. If there's any chance of fixing this, you owe me that much. She looked down, her hands trembling as they clutched her mug. I already told you, I ended things with Eric. It was a mistake, Mark. A terrible mistake. And how long were you making that mistake? I pressed, my voice sharper than I intended. How long were you sneaking around behind my back? Her silence was deafening. Answer me. I barked, slamming my hand on the table. She jumped, tears spilling down her cheeks. 3 months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It started 3 months ago. I leaned back, the weight of her confession settling over me. 3 months, I repeated, shaking my head. And you expect me to believe it never went beyond flirting? That nothing physical happened? She hesitated, and in that pause, I knew the truth. Don't lie to me, Emily, I said, my voice low, dangerous. I need to hear you say it. Her face crumpled as she broke into sobs. I kissed him, she admitted. Once. It was stupid and reckless, and I regretted it immediately. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of fury and despair. "And that's it? A kiss?" She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes betrayed her. I'd seen enough courtroom dramas to know when someone was holding something back. And this was no TV show. This was my life. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" I asked, my voice ice cold. "You're sitting here, crying about how sorry you are, but you're still lying to me. You don't regret what you did, Emily. You regret getting caught." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. I was done being her safety net, her backup plan. "This is how it's going to work," I said, cutting through her cries. "I'm staying in this house for now, but only because I need time to figure out my next steps. As of this moment, our marriage is over in every way that matters." Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. "Mark, no." I held up a hand, silencing her. "You don't get to argue. You made your choice when you betrayed me. And now, I'm making mine." After our conversation, I threw myself into work, using it as an escape from the mess at home. I kept my distance from Emily, avoiding her as much as possible. The house was a battleground of unspoken words and heavy silences, each room a reminder of what we'd lost. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. I reconnected with an old friend, Claire. We'd met years ago at a company retreat and had kept in touch sporadically through social media. A quick message about an upcoming software conference led to a coffee meetup, and before I knew it, I was telling her everything about Emily, the betrayal, the uncertainty. Claire listened without judgment, her hazel eyes full of compassion. She didn't offer empty platitudes or cliched advice. She just listened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt seen, heard. "It's not your fault, you know," she said softly as we sat in the corner of a bustling cafe. "Whatever excuses she gave you, her actions were her choice. You didn't force her into anything." Her words were a balm to the wound Emily had left behind. We spent hours talking, laughing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost, hope. When I got home that evening, Emily was waiting in the living room. She looked up as I entered, her face etched with worry. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone almost accusatory. "Out," I replied curtly, brushing past her. "With who?" she pressed, following me down the hall. I stopped, turning to face her. "That's none of your business," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You lost the right to ask me questions about my life when you brought Eric into it." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I climbed the stairs and closed the door to the guest room, leaning against it as I let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need Emily to feel whole. The days that followed my coffee with Claire felt different, lighter somehow. For weeks, I had been drowning in anger and betrayal, trapped in a fog of what-ifs and how could she. But sitting across from Claire, sharing my pain with someone who truly listened, had sparked something in me, clarity. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix what was broken. I was thinking about how to move forward. Emily must have sensed the shift. She grew more desperate, her attempts to engage me becoming more frequent and frantic. "Mark, can we talk?" she'd plead, but I brushed her off each time. I couldn't stomach another round of hollow apologies or self-serving justifications. I needed space, and she needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. One evening, as I worked in the guest room, now my makeshift office, Emily knocked softly on the door. I didn't bother looking up. "What is it?" She hesitated, then stepped inside. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said, her voice trembling. "I think we both need some space." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. A part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her she should have left weeks ago, but I stayed silent. Watching her retreat, suitcase in hand, felt like the closing of a chapter, a bittersweet relief. The next morning, I met Claire for another coffee. What had started as a casual reconnecting was quickly becoming the highlight of my days. Her laughter was contagious, her insights sharp and refreshing. Over time, I found myself sharing more than just my frustrations about Emily. We talked about life, dreams, and the things we'd both lost and gained over the years. "I can't believe how easy it is to talk to you," I admitted one afternoon. It's like I've known you forever. She smiled, her hazel eyes warm. Maybe because we've both been through the fire, she said. Pain has a way of making people honest. Her words stayed with me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding back in my marriage, not just recently, but for years. I'd been so focused on being the steady partner, the provider, that I'd stopped being real with Emily. And maybe, deep down, she'd felt it too. But with Claire, there was no pretense. No history weighing us down. No hidden resentments simmering beneath the surface. Just two people connecting in a way I hadn't thought possible anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the life I'd imagined with Emily, the plans, the promises. It hurt to admit those dreams were gone, but for the first time, I wasn't scared of what lay ahead. I didn't know where things with Claire might lead, but I knew one thing. I was done living in the past. This was my chance to start over. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to take it. Emily's absence brought an unfamiliar quiet to the house. At first, it was suffocating, a constant reminder of the void she had left behind. But over time, I began to appreciate the stillness. It wasn't just the silence of an empty home. It was the absence of tension, the lack of walking on eggshells. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I focused on rebuilding my life. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could pour my energy without the emotional drain of dealing with Emily. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years, and it was cathartic. Each mile felt like shedding a layer of pain, leaving it behind on the pavement. One Saturday morning, I was jogging through a nearby park when I spotted Claire sitting on a bench. She had her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a book open in her lap. The sight of her made me slow to a walk. I wasn't sure why, but seeing her felt like a moment I didn't want to rush past. "Hey," I called out, stopping a few feet away. She looked up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Mark, fancy seeing you here." "I could say the same," I replied, catching my breath. "You come here often?" "Only when I need some peace and quiet," she said, patting the bench beside her. "Care to join me?" I hesitated for a moment before sitting down. My heart was still racing from the run, but now it was doing double time for a different reason. "What are you reading?" I asked, nodding toward the book. She held it up, revealing the cover. "Something light," she joked. "A murder mystery." "Sounds relaxing," I teased, and she laughed, a sound that instantly made the world feel less heavy. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly as it always did with Claire. She told me about her work as a graphic designer, her love for photography, and her dream of one day traveling to Iceland to see the northern lights. I found myself opening up too, sharing things I hadn't even realized I needed to say, about my marriage, my fears, and the strange mix of guilt and hope I was carrying. "I feel like I'm finally starting to figure out who I am again," I admitted. "But it's scary, you know? Starting over." Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's terrifying," she agreed, "but it's also freeing. You get to decide what your life looks like now. No compromises, no settling." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. That afternoon, as I walked home, I realized how much lighter I felt. Claire wasn't just a distraction from my pain. She was a reminder that life could be good again, that I could be happy again. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a possibility. A week passed after my chance encounter with Claire in the park. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of balance returning to my life. My days were full: work, running, and the occasional coffee or phone call with Claire. She was becoming a constant presence, her warmth and humor a salve for the wounds Emily had left behind. But just as I began to feel like I was moving forward, the past came knocking, literally. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emily standing on the porch, a bag slung over her shoulder and a look of desperation in her eyes. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling, "can I come in?" I stared at her for a moment, torn between slamming the door in her face and letting her speak. Finally, I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. She set her bag down and looked around, as if expecting the house to have changed in her absence. "I needed to see you," she said, her hands twisting nervously. "I couldn't stay at my sister's anymore. It didn't feel right. I needed to be here with you." I folded my arms, leaning against the wall. "Emily, I don't know what you're expecting. Nothing's changed." "I know," she said quickly, "but I have. Mark, I've had time to think, and I see now how much I've hurt you. I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You call betraying me for months a mistake? Sneaking around, lying to my face, and then asking for an open marriage so you could justify it? That's not a mistake, Emily. That's a choice." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me another chance. Please, Mark." I looked at her, my heart hardening against her tears. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come crawling back when you've already made it clear I wasn't enough for you?" "Because I was wrong," she said, stepping closer. "Eric, it wasn't real. It was an escape, but it wasn't love. I see that now. You're my husband, Mark. You're the only one I've ever truly loved." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For so long, I'd craved this. Her remorse, her recognition of what she'd thrown away. But now that it was here, it felt hollow, too little, too late. "I don't know if I can believe you," I said, my voice cold. "I don't know if I even want to." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mark, please," she whispered. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved with everything I had, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "I need time," I said finally, "to think." Emily's plea haunted me in the days that followed. Her tear-streaked face, the desperation in her voice. This was the Emily I had loved for years, the one who had stood by me through countless highs and lows. But her betrayal had fractured something fundamental, something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I spent hours replaying our conversation, trying to imagine what life would look like if I took her back. Could I trust her again? Would I spend every day questioning her loyalty, doubting her love? The answers didn't come easily. Claire noticed my distraction during one of our coffee meetups. "You seem off today," she said gently. "Emily came back," I admitted. "She wants to fix things." Claire's expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Concern, maybe disappointment. "And what do you want?" she asked. That was the question, wasn't it? I had spent so much time thinking about what Emily wanted, what she needed, that I hadn't stopped to consider my own desires. For the first time, I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted her back at all. That night, I made my decision. The next evening, I invited Emily over to talk. She arrived looking hopeful, her eyes searching mine for any sign of reconciliation. We sat across from each other in the living room, the space between us feeling like a chasm. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore, Emily. I can't be in a marriage where trust doesn't exist. It's not fair to either of us." Her face crumpled, but I pressed on. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I can't forgive what you've done. And even if I could, I don't think we could ever get back what we had." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded slowly. "I understand," she whispered. "I want a divorce," I said, the words final and firm. She sobbed, but there was no anger in her voice, no protest. She seemed to accept the inevitability of what I was saying. When she left, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. For the first time, I felt like I was truly taking control of my life. The divorce process was messy. Emily initially promised she wouldn't fight me, but that quickly changed when lawyers got involved. She wanted half of everything, the house, the savings, even a share of my retirement. But she had underestimated me. Years ago, at my father's insistence, we had signed a prenuptial agreement. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it became my shield. With the prenup in place, Emily was entitled to very little. Her lawyer tried to argue, but it was airtight. In the end, she walked away with her car, a small savings account, and some furniture. I kept the house, the bulk of our assets, and most importantly, my peace of mind. With the divorce finalized, I threw myself into building a new life. I renovated the house, transforming it into a space that felt like mine. I started traveling, something I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. Claire remained a constant presence, her friendship grounding me through the chaos. Over time, our bond deepened, and what started as platonic slowly grew into something more. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took my hand. "Do you think you'll ever trust again?" she asked. I looked at her, realizing for the first time that I already did. "I think I'm learning to," I said, squeezing her hand. Months later, I received an unexpected call from Emily. She wanted to meet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, where she looked like a shadow of her former self. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice thick with regret. "Losing you was the worst thing I've ever done." I listened as she apologized again, her words filled with remorse. But I felt no anger, no bitterness. I had moved on, and her regret no longer held power over me. "I hope you find happiness, Emily," I said as I stood to leave. "But I already have." Claire and I took things slow, careful not to rush into anything. But with each passing day, it became clear that what we had was real. She was everything I hadn't known I needed, kind, funny, and fiercely loyal. She made me believe in love again, not as a fairy tale, but as a partnership built on trust and respect. One night, as we walked along the beach, I stopped and turned to her. "Claire," I said, my voice steady, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Her smile lit up the night. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, pulling me into a kiss. Looking back, I realized Emily's betrayal had been both a curse and a gift. It had shattered the life I thought I wanted, but it had also forced me to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. Claire and I eventually moved in together, blending our lives with a sense of joy I hadn't felt in years. As for Emily, I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling to rebuild her life. Part of me felt sorry for her, but I knew her choices were her own. In the end, I found peace, not because of revenge or justice, but because I learned to let go. My happiness wasn't tied to the past. It was in the life I was creating, one step at a time, and for the first time, I was truly free.